Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 392, Parametrised Blueprints. Posted by Coverix. Hello! Today I'm going to cover a feature I only just finished. I was thinking about this idea for years already. I always thought the feature is too hardcore to be included, but I learned that it is usually a mistake to underestimate the players. So I gave it a go and decided to share it right away. So we'll get into it in a minute. It's a little bit techy. It's not that techy. It feels like it's not quite a quality of life change. I mean, it is, and that's the justification that's given, and we'll get into that. But it doesn't quite feel like this is a pain point everyone would have. It's sort of a bit more specialised if you're doing quite big builds, I think, where this would really come up as an issue. But it is really interesting. I think it's the sort of feature, as I say, that it's sort of quality of life, but it's more, I could see the community making like amazing things with this, and particularly if you're a new player and you want someone who wants to download blueprints and that sort of thing, you'd be able to download like this generic set of blueprints. We'll get into it, but it feels like, I say, the sort of improvement or change that's actually going to give people a lot of options rather than being pure quality of life as such. So yeah, it's a really interesting feature, although it does mean there's not going to be a great deal of speculation this time. Motivation. The most common motivational example is the train unloading station. Typically, I have a whole setup in a blueprint: rails, train stop, filtered inserters to avoid contamination, etc. This is nice, but whenever I build the blueprint, I need to reconfigure all the filtered inserters for the target item and also change the name of the stop, and it is tedious. We'll look at the video in a minute, but the caption says the long monotonous process of setting up station after station. There are two ways to solve it in 1.1. Use circuit networks, but it feels like an overkill. More on that later. And you also can't set the train stop name by circuit network at the moment. Interesting use of at the moment. Having one specific blueprint for each item, which sounds like a nightmare. This is the video. It's at, I don't know, it might be 3 times speed, but it's certainly very, very quick. The purpose of it is to illustrate the tedium of doing what Coverix does. I would put a little caveat here that filtering of inserters on a train station is a little bit of an old school thing to do. It's something you tend to do if you're... I suppose one of the things, maybe it's an issue or could be an issue or something Coverix has a problem with the new generic train system, that accidentally they end up, maybe for circuit condition, like less than, is set to less than rather than less than or equal to, or something like that. And the train's got the wrong items in it, sort of thing. But there are better ways of solving this. For example, you can filter your trains, and then you can just use generic, stack filter inserters or stack inserters or fast inserters. The changing the train stop name is interesting. That can be annoying if you're setting up a lot of stations all at once. So I would say that. But as I say, they're basically going through, they've got a generic blueprint, and they're then basically reconfiguring it every single time. And the generic blueprint is set to fish, basically, so it's completely empty. I think it's really a big issue if you are doing very large builds, if you're doing mega bases and that sort of thing, or, I could see this in particular. One of the things I would say, one of the guesses I would make is this might become quite annoying on new planets. You're on, say, your 4th planet that you've gone to, and you're turning up and you're bringing a load of stuff in a spaceship, and you're like, right, I don't need to do all the research for belts and all that sort of stuff, so I'll just lay down my basic initial base. And so then you've got to set up, 20 train stations, because we're going to have a lot more items in the game. And it just takes ages, and, it involves doing the same actions over and over again. And of course, this is Factorio, it's about automating everything. So I'm not sure, I mean, it's probably just, a randomized example, this, for the thing. But I sort of scoured through this. I couldn't see any Easter eggs. It looks like it's an entirely vanilla map, to be honest with you. Couldn't see any hint of any new features. But what's being dropped off at this base is a little odd. It's all it's kind of all military stuff. I say it's got to be just because it's like, almost a random example. They're just picking things out. But here in the capsules, dropped off both normal shotguns and armor-piercing, shells, both regular shells and AP ammo, regular ammo and AP ammo, as well as then barrels, explosives, so, or as if they're going to make cliff explosives, maybe, sulfur and stone, I say then wires, barrels, batteries, and it's a very, very weird list if it's meant to be a real base. I suspect it isn't. It's just like picking through random examples, just literally to give the example of the thing. But as I say, I was a bit lost when it started dropping off cannon shells, explosive cannon shells, nuclear cannon shells, nuclear explosive cannon shells. So I think it's just random things to demonstrate the point. Parameterized blueprints. This naturally leads to the definition of what we want. We want to have a blueprint which doesn't have a specific item configuration, but rather is generic and allows you to configure it differently each time you build it. The question is how to implement it. Without adding unnecessary GUI clutter that is just in the way unless we care about this specific feature. Reconfiguring existing blueprints. The first piece of the puzzle is a tool to reconfigure existing blueprints. For simplicity, let's take this example of a constant combinator configured like this. And oh my god, this is like the stealth drop of the thing, because, I say that, I'm pretty sure it was mentioned that they're going to try and do this, but this is reconfiguring blueprints. Not full-on design, changing like track designs and stuff, but I mean, I don't know about you, but I've made errors like set the wrong value on a combinator or set the wrong filter on a filter inserter or some error like that. And you have to basically like build the entire blueprint, do the tiny little change, which I say is literally just reconfiguring a combinator or something like that, re-blueprint it, and and then archive it back around. And just the ability to go into that blueprint, click on the thing that's wrong, change it, and you're done. That's just amazing. Just that feature alone makes this brilliant. So the example that's showing here basically is just a constant combinator, which is the one that pumps out the constant signals according to the game clock tick. And you see we've got the groups thing there from a previous output, but then it's basically saying it's constantly outputting 5 iron plate, 5 copper plate, and X7, which are literally just random numbers, I think. And you see it's got this section thing now. Did we know about that? I think we knew about that. I think it was the group thing. I mean, we knew about the description, but that seems to be saying that you can have different sections within constant combinators. When we make a blueprint of it, we can now access the main tool used for reconfiguration. So obviously that was what the constant combinator was doing, and now they've done the old, drag the blueprint over, and there's basically a new button. Okay, so this is the point about not cluttering up the GUI. You've just got a little button that allows you to do this parameterization. So this little pink icon here, and it brings up this menu. I'm not going to go through it here because it talks about it later. But basically, it's setting. If you remember, we had iron 5, copper 5, X7 basically. So that's what it's mapping out. My assumption is that how it works, because this is a bit it doesn't explain, is that if you blueprint this combinator, it comes up just with a normal blueprint, and it only does the parameterization if you press that button. So it's not that all blueprints are now parameterized. It's that if you press that button, you can start turning it into a parameterized blueprint. I assume that's how it's going to work, so that it's literally hidden unless you start messing about with it. The first and most simple usage of this UI is to change all occurrences of some item or number in the blueprint to something else. If I want to change all the places where X signal is used in the blueprint to Y, I just change the value in the UI and confirm. The blueprint was just reconfigured. The same with changing all 5s in a blueprint. So yeah, just describing what I was talking about before, that this is basically a way of reconfiguring, values in a blueprint, which is just going to be awesome. Now that is a quality of life feature. Practically every setting and number you can have in an entity can be reconfigured by this feature. Inserter filters, assembler recipes, circuit network settings, combinator configurations, logistic requests, inventory filters, even rich text icons. Wow. The last one can be used to change the name of the train stop as long as you make it a rich text part of it. This is already an improvement, as you can always reconfigure the blueprint to a different item before building it, but it still isn't good enough. So that's the solution where you sort of have, a million blueprints and you have one of every one. You could basically use this parameterization feature, just copy the blueprint and just copy it up and have, your uranium ammo, cannon shell and, those weird things that they were doing there, have all of them on different blueprints. So that's an improvement as is. Parameters. The first step was to define special IDs called parameters for items, recipes, fluids, and entities. And here we just see that GUI in the game. So these special IDs are the purple sort of circuity things there. I mean, it's interesting we've only got 10. I would have thought we'd have more. I'd have thought they'd have had, the full alphabet on. Effectively, these are like generic replacements for the values here. So if we wanted this blueprint to be super generic, which is what Coverix is trying to do, we could just make this the pink 1, the pink 2, the pink 3, and then basically that would allow you to set it each time, because these are essentially like a placeholder with a please fill out this value function to them. So when you place the blueprint down, effectively it goes through all of these and goes, what's the value, what's the value, what's the value. These have no meanings outside the parameterization context. They are just used for the blueprint generic configuration. They're normally not selectable anywhere in the game outside the blueprint configuration menu, but for power users there is an interface setting to make them actually available everywhere. I guess that's just to have other options for people who want to do a lot of messing about. So back to the original blueprint. We can configure it like this. Now they put the names in, okay, but they do explain these are optional. But basically it's saying, if you imagine this was the iron, this was the 7. Oh no, that must be the copper, I guess. Value 7. Yes, because the 7 was the X, wasn't it? And the iron and the copper had that value. I guess it processes it. I'm just thinking it through. I guess it processes it through sequentially. So, because my question here would be, this is sort of undefined in a way, because 0 and 1, if you imagine that becomes iron plate and that becomes copper plate, I'm assuming that unless you've added this, because this was one of the questions I had with this. This is fine, but because these are being given 5 and 5, they're the same value, and therefore it's 5 there. Well, you notice it's the opposite way around, but basically that's the 5 that you've got in both of those. There isn't a separation between the two 5s. So if I was reconfiguring this blueprint and I wanted 10 iron plate and 20 copper, then you'd have to do it slightly differently, basically, I think, because this... To me, this is a little undefined, because that basically, does that 5 apply to that one, both of them? As it happens, it's both of them. And I guess you as, the user would know how you would set up your blueprint. Well, I don't know about you, but I've got literally hundreds of the things. And the control signal is, that's because it's X. And so these are the names they're putting in, so you could call them whatever you want. But as I say, the link between these is not very clear. Here, I specified all of the 3 IDs to be parameters, and the number 5 used in both of the items to be parameterized as well. Filling up the name is not necessary, but it is useful for the user of the blueprint to know what he is asked for in the next step when the blueprint is being built. So what they're saying about it becoming a parameter is just this tick box. You could set this as a hard thing. You could set that as 10, and then it wouldn't ask you unless you tick that boxed. So in other words, it's another way of getting more parameters in. But as I say, I don't know. I think it could do with a bit more of a clear link. They could do with being inset in a way, but would that make it any clearer? I don't know. It's just there's nothing that clearly links these two other than kind of the order. And notice, of course, when it was done here, the order was different. So it wouldn't be clear to me, certainly, that 5 applied to the copper, which it does. So I think a little tweak could be done there. Whenever you try to build a blueprint configured this way, you get this small dialog where you ask to fill out the parameters for this specific instance of the blueprint. And there we go. So they've created the blueprint, had these generic, these parameterizable values. And then when they've plopped the blueprint down, as you can see, it says the 0, 1, 2. So it is visually there. And then it's basically saying, classic programmer starting with a 0. But then it's basically saying you need to fill out these values, please. I assume it would just stay blank if you just left it like that. I don't know what happens if you leave it and you tick green, because I don't think that's in other videos. I care about details, so you can even see how the build previews changes as the parameters are being specified. So we've got another video here. We'll just play this in screen. Thing says, whoops, alt icons update as parameters are chosen. And you can see, basic point is these things are being changed. So we'll just play that again, talk it through. So pops down the blueprint, and you see it's got the 0, 1, 2, 4. No 3. So it then pops up and says, gives this thing, because it has to fill out these values. And it says, what's the 0 value? Which is that one there. So, and it's a recipe. Next one, the 1, for green circuits. Next one. Oops, see what that was. So just selecting from the intermediates menu. Just trying to see if there's any new icons. So I think a lot of these are taken from a vanilla default game. So steel, constant load, L. Oh, no they're not. We have new symbols. Ah. We've not seen these, have we? This is what was on that Friday Facts. Let me find that one. So back in Friday Facts 380, you may remember, there was a big T of some description on a blueprint. And we didn't know what it was. Maybe it's been explained and I've just missed it. But that T is clearly that one. And these just look like diagrammatic representations, don't they? If I was building a train network, yeah, and I wanted to do a straight piece, a diagonal piece, a curved piece, a crossroads, a diagonal crossroads, a diagonal, a right-hand bend, a T-junction, or a roundabout, having these symbols would be really useful. So I think that's what they are then. So basically, I'm not being a div and these are already in the game, are they? But that's what they clearly are for. I mean, they could have some meaning. You know, a lot of the, like L has the default value, and like A is for accumulators and that sort of thing. They could have set some of those up in the game. But they're clearly symbols that look like, a rail junction for you to build your rail junction as a blueprint. Huh, interesting. Anyway, yes, so they then set the signal K. And there you go. So none of these in this blueprint presumably have values. They've been all been set as, I mean, obviously the recipes wouldn't, but these combinators, it's not asking for a number. So it may have it set as a default, I guess, that it's hidden in the thing, or it doesn't have a number on it, so probably not. But then it just allows you to configure what it is, and then you could go away, I guess, and say, oh no, actually I want it to be 500 or whatever. Nice to see those though. Can I answer that question? Caption just says, alt icons update as parameters are chosen. And that was just showing that dynamically updating. And once you press confirm, the blueprint is built with the desired configuration. So it didn't actually build it until you press the tick button. And now it says setting up a breeze up the stations is a breeze with the parameters. And this is just the video zoomed in. And it's now simply being asked to do, put the recipes in as they're going through. And it is a lot easier. As I say, I suppose one of the things with this, they're putting in the same ones again. Is this really a station that you would want to build? There you go, cannon shells again. Oh no, well, but then batteries were one of them. This isn't some hint at some bizarre thing we're going to have to build that involves military gear. But yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the things with this, and as I say, you could kind of alleviate some of these problems by doing trains in a different way effectively. Thinking about it, I said before you could filter the trains. You could, but if you wanted to make use of the generic train system, you couldn't do that anymore, could you? Because you couldn't filter the carriages. So yeah, I suppose there is the possibility that it's become more of a problem. But there's also, I think to some extent nowadays, with a lot of the changes they've made, filtering train stations, because of rogue items is not such a common thing as such. But I guess the point is, it lets you play in the way you want, sort of thing, and you can do this type of thing. And there are loads of other examples I could think of where you might want to do these types of changes and have a blueprint that just asks you, are you dropping off oil? Are you dropping off sulfuric acid? Are you dropping off light oil and that sort of thing? Dependent parameters. So this is already useful, but still not good enough. Why? Because sometimes parameters are expected to be related to each other and forcing the user of the blueprint to always fill them in correctly. What do I mean by the dependencies? Let's say I have a blueprint to craft an item with 3 ingredients, parameters 1, 2 and 3, and to take those ingredients from the train network. Naturally, I can make a big setup with 3 input stations, each parameterized to be one of the inputs, and a row of assembly machines parameterized to create the desired item, parameter 0. But whenever I want to build this blueprint, I would have to remember and manually fill out the 3 ingredients for the desired item, which would not only slow me down, but also open the possibility of a mistake. This is why parameters can be configured to be an ingredient of another parameter automatically, instead of having to fill it in. So we see a GUI capture that. The bit underneath says parameter 1, 2 and 3 are set to be ingredients of the parameter 0. So when this blueprint is being built, only the value of parameter 0 is asked for, and the remaining values are automatically filled out. It's very clever, this, I'll be honest. So it's basically saying, so when they were doing this, for example, this blueprint, you noticed it had a green circuit on there, which of course is made up of copper wires and an iron plate. So if you imagine that this was copper wire instead, or more generically, it's a dependent recipe item. You could set up a generic blueprint which has a always direct feed in, and it's getting into the territory of, when you do like a mall type of thing and you just do lots of assemblers and all feeding into each other, that sort of thing. And you would just be able to say, right, well, I want more green circuits, more red circuits, more blue circuits. And you just have a very generic configuration. You click the green circuits button, or you set the parameter for recipe 1 to be green circuits, it puts it to be copper wire basically. And when you set it to red circuits, it sets it to, well, I guess it would be copper wire again, wouldn't it? But maybe it's blue circuits and it sets it to red circuits and green circuits. Do you see what I mean? So you can basically have a very generic insertory system, for a bunch of assemblers all feeding into each other. And where you don't care about ratios, you could just say, right, this is green circuits, this is blue circuits, this is red circuits, and it automatically then fills out the sub-assemblers. So the assemblers that feed in, it automatically sets the recipe. So yeah, it's very clever, and it therefore gets dependencies. So, if you have a station that drops off iron plate and you wanted to make it gear wheels, you could call the station, just have the one button that says gear wheels, and then it just feeds into the assemblers and makes gear wheels. But you could also do exactly the same thing for wires. You could just set this thing to wires, and then it would set all of the recipes to be wire recipes. So, I could see quite a lot of uses for that. And I say this is where we get into this territory I was talking about, of it being a really good and useful tool for players to come up with stuff. It doesn't really, it's not really a quality of life thing, but it's a feature that kind of enables us to do a lot of stuff that other people are way smarter than me to come up with. Dependent numbers. With number configuration, the way the dependency can be set is much more free as maths exists. Let's look at this example. So yeah, we'll just explain. So we have a blueprint where 3 numbers are present, 100, 101 and 200. But for some reason, we only want the user to modify the value 100, but the contraption just needs the second number to be 1 bigger and the third number to be double of the first. Again, a lot of these, when you try and think of examples, you end up with just random things, but I'm sure there's loads of ways that this could be used. And that's shown in the actual screen capture here, where we've got the value 100, saying it's a parameter, and it has a variable x, okay? Oh, x, I see, I get it. I didn't spot that before. So it's basically saying that that's 100, and we're assigning that to a variable x. And then when we're saying this will be an output value, but it will be x plus 1, and this will be an output value, but it's x times 2. And presumably you could then set those to be, this could be a combinator, and it always has, this is 100, 101 and 200. So it could be something you might use for walls. You might be setting things where you want, 50 artillery shell turrets but 5,000 gun bullets, and you might want to keep a ratio-y thing. You might want to say, well, it needs to be between 501 and 5,001 and what would be double? 1,000. That's your range that you've got to set. And if it goes below that, you call a train. If it goes above that, you send a train away or something. I can't think of an example there, but that's the type of thing it feels like you could do. And you could then use that same ratioing. So, because I've done this loads of times with stations where, on walls in particular, I want I want 100 of this and 100 of that and 100 of them and 100 of them and 100 of them. And you have to go through and manually configure everything, when really you're just setting the same values and you want it the same ratio. So you want to say, well, I want 100, let's set it, if it's less than 50, call a train, and if it goes above 100, send the train away, sort of thing. So that sounds like it would be quite useful in that example. This is why each parameterized number can be assigned a variable, and its value can be used in a math formula in all of the subsequent dependent numbers. I'm assuming you could go really complicated with it, so you could do if you gave these variables, you could then, call that y is x times 2. You could then set up a whole quadratic equation of, of relationships. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you can. So in this case, if you fill, upon building the blueprint, the 100 to be 10 instead, it will automatically set 101 to actually be 11 and 200 to be 20. And as I say, that feels like that walls example seems like it would be a good example of that, in that You know, you want lots and lots of ammo. You don't want lots of artillery shells. But having a generic thing where it's just a ratio, you know, this is always 10 times this, and the top value is always, you know, within this range, and the bottom value is in this range, and you scale that depending on the item type. That actually sounds quite useful. Conclusion. Factorio has been compared to programming many times. I've done it quite a bit. And this is just another part of the analogy. Almost everything you can do with parameterized blueprints can be done through circuit network logic, so it looks almost redundant. In programming, the parallel is the compile time function execution versus runtime function execution. Basically, if you know the result of the computation already while compiling the program, it'd be a waste to calculate it every time the program is run. You can just put the number directly into the program, which is very similar to knowing that this setup will always be filtered to take iron gear wheels, so it feels a little bit wasteful to make a circuit network logic around it just to simplify the building process. So in that example, what they're effectively saying, so there's the two types of compiling, and it's, I guess the equivalent is when they're setting these train stations to be whatever mad ingredients we're putting in this time, the user is having to set both the station and the filters. So they're having to do two separate operations when they know that every single time they set this, it's the same on these. And so effectively that's the shortcut that's being given. In terms of the compiling type, the sort of thing basically is sort of saying, well, it's actually fairly similar to what was being talked about in the noise thing, where basically you have a formula and it does a calculation. But if that calculation is essentially redundant and is always going to return a 0, there's kind of no point having that calculation being done every time the function is called. And you can do that in the compiler. You can basically say, right, find the bits of my code that are always 7 or whatever, and you just resolve them, and it just sort of replaces them with a 7. And that's kind of what was, I think, was being talked about in the noise one the other week. And the same is the idea here. It's the equivalent of saying, right, well, I always know that these are going to be a battery because because they're always going to be the same as the train station. So you could have a whole logic system that says when this is set to train to battery, put these to battery and that sort of thing. But instead, they're just giving the ability to set it dynamically each time. And so rather than having to plop down a logic thing that sets these, and this is never going to change is kind of the point. This is always going to be battery. So you might as well just set it as battery, thing. There's no point doing that complicated logic circuit thing to work out this is battery when I'm just going to set it as battery once and never change it, sort of thing. I'd love to hear your feedback about this feature. Is it too much? Is it understandable? Can't you wait to use it? Let us know on the usual channels. I always say this, it's not one for speculation, and I suppose it isn't speculation in the terms of, what's coming in Space Age and that sort of thing. But I love this type of stuff. I love these these types of changes, especially when it introduces more code-like things into Factorio. Just sort of shows the power of coding and that sort of thing. And I think there's a couple of tweaks, that I would kind of request, which is making it clearer what's related to what. This part is what I'm talking about, really, of sort of saying, this is an ingredient of 0, this is an ingredient of 0, this is an ingredient of 0. Being able to do that is a more clear link to me because it's creating like a chain of dependencies for the variables, parameters that can be swapped in. Now, maybe I'm just being dumb and it is here, but I don't see how that 5 is linked to both of those. In a sort of a default way it is. But what if you want to come along and you want to say, right, I want 7 copper rather than 5 copper? At the moment, I don't think you could do that, and it's simply because your original blueprint that you had has been set up in that way. You would have to build it. This is, going back to the problem that it solves. You would have to build it, edit one of these to be slightly different, and then change it. And, in order to give you the extra line here that is the number associated with this one. So it would be better to have that a similar association approach, that this value I have associated with this one I have associated with this, because as far as I can tell from this, you'd be able to nest it. So you'd be able to build something where actually, say this is an assembler making blue circuits, this one would be your assembler making green circuits, this is your assembler that makes copper wire for green circuits, this is your red circuits assembler, this is your copper wire one that for red circuits. Do you see what I mean? So you get a nested tree of dependency, and that's clear, I think, and that you could achieve that in this. And also this formula, setting this variable parameter and doing that, it doesn't seem to be a feature of this that I can tell. You're able to say it's a parameter, so you can set the value at runtime, as it were, as you're using it. But I don't see how that's associated with those two separately. There's nothing saying that 5 is with 0 and 5 is with 1. There's nothing saying that 7 is with 2, other than the order. And in this, the order appears not to matter. So that 5 is being applied to both the iron and copper, apparently. And it's not really clear that that's the case. I'm going to say it's your blueprint, you would be doing it, but if I'm thinking in terms particularly, I've come back to this area of the base 200 hours later. I can't remember what the hell all my blueprints were for in this area. Why have I got just one variable 5? Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of thing, as well as if you're doing it, if you're downloading these blueprints and you're trying to work out what's going on, and you want to set this to 50 and this to 100, you can't do that unless you build it and then you change it, sort of thing. So, and I say that's what I'm saying about trying to avoid that. You shouldn't need to build it and re-blueprint it so that you can edit it. You should just be able to edit it. But say that there's probably something I'm missing, that's not, that's something you can achieve. But yeah, so no real speculation. And I couldn't see any Easter eggs apart from the reveal, I guess. Is it a reveal? That these are symbols, basically. And I don't know if they have any specific meaning. Going to be hugely useful. I've got loads of blueprints, and you have to kind of scroll through them for rail. And then, I love my rail blueprints. Actually, I think they're one of the best things I did in the blueprint series. But you have to scroll through them and work out which is the diagonal, which is the crossing, which is the T-junction, and which is the turn, and which is the other turn. And do you know what I mean? And just being able to stick a symbol on, like in that hotbar in that thing now, having this T, you just know that's a rail T-junction. I might use it for anything else, but it's interesting knowing it's a symbol, Yeah, so I always manage to dribble on for hours and hours, even when there's nothing to really speculate about. But yeah. Before I do the outro, I'm just going to do a little self-promo. This makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. I'm quite British, and self-promo is not my natural strong suit. So I put out a video yesterday, and it's a collection of wild speculation about what might be coming up in Space Age for the expansion for Factorio. I put a little link in the card above, and it'd be great if you could go and watch it. It's quite long, hour and a half, and there's some weird stuff in there, but it was a lot of fun to make. And I say I'm not very comfortable with doing this self-promo stuff, but I say that's a really fun project that I did, and it'd be great to make more and get your feedback on it. Hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you want to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, then you can find me live streaming Factorio every Saturday over my Twitch channel, Factorismagistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. As maths exists. Wow.